Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm giggling because I still can't get over the Zoom saying this meeting is being recorded. But I'm here today with Josh, and we're going to do our Q&A session that we ask people for questions from. So thanks for joining me, Joshua Denny.
Good to be with you, Debbie, as always. Yeah.
And we've got a few questions from the community page. I didn't know whether to name check people when I say the questions later, so we thought we might not name check people for now. But if you want to see who said what, you can find it on the community page. But I actually wanted to start with a quote from Beelzebub's Tales, All and Everything, just to get us in the mood. So this is from page 385. All these chief directors and advisors then became such in accordance with the objective merits they personally acquired, and which could be really sensed by all the beings around them. And it proceeded in the following way. All the beings of this planet then began to work in order to have in their consciousness this divine function of genuine conscience. And for this purpose, as everywhere in the universe, they transubstantiated in themselves what are called the being obligonian strivings, which consist of the following 5, namely, the first striving, to have in their ordinary being existence everything satisfying and really necessary for their planetary body. The second striving, to have a constant and unflagging instinctive need for self-perfection in the sense of being. The third, the conscious striving to know ever more and more concerning the laws of world creation and world maintenance. The fourth, the striving from the beginning of their existence to pay for their arising and their individuality as quickly as possible, in order afterwards to be free to lighten as much as possible the sorrow of our common Father. And the fifth, the striving always to assist the most rapid perfecting of other beings, both those similar to oneself and those of other forms, up to the degree of the sacred mat photai, that is, up to the degree of self-individuality. At this period, when every terrestrial free-centered being existed and worked consciously upon himself in accordance with these 5 strivings, many of them, thanks to this, quickly arrived at results of objective attainments perceptible to others. And I thought that could be the answer to all the questions we were offered, but but they're important, aren't they? That's why he put them out there for us.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like you could say that they're probably his attempt maybe to summarize the basic, the basic aims of the work or practices of the work, that is a big theme in Beelzebub's Tales. Like, I suppose Ashiata Shamash is kind of like, I think we've talked a bit about him before. You could kind of see him as almost like the prophet of the fourth way, even though he's cast as a character, in the past, in ancient history. But lots of people have pondered on the idea of it, Gurdjieff referencing, you could say even himself, through Ashiata, and the fourth way, or his kind of way of working with people. Like you say, it mentions in the book that Ashiata kind of worked, I think, with people in a different way to what's described of the other prophets in the past. Like a lot of the other prophets are, they talked about using different impulses like faith, love, and hope, and I think reason. That's the way they kind of taught man or appealed to that side of his nature, like the side of his nature that can respond to hope, love, and faith, and so on. But I think he says that Ashiata Shamash worked with conscience, the impulse of conscience. And Ashiata kind of says that through his like deliberations and study of man, he kind of felt that was the only impulse that was left in man that he could use for his development. It was only through his conscience that was still present in him, because his conscience is still in him in his subconsciousness, and it's not kind of been atrophied or like degenerated like the other impulses. That it's only because of that he still has this potential there. So he speaks about Ashiata Shamash working in a different way with people. Like it looks like on paper that he just spends time talking with people. Like, he doesn't really say much about like performing miracles and things like that maybe some of the old kind of messengers from above or prophets of the great religions did. But just more like working in a kind of down-to-earth way with people and talking with them. And somehow from that kind of interaction, you could say that he was able to or stimulate something in the subconsciousness of the people who he was talking to then, that kind of evoked the subconscious the subconsciousness, that side of them, and the impulse of conscience that was present, still present in that. So yeah, he remarks that it brought about a big change in the kind of social circumstances, primarily because people kind of believed, that they did have this potential in them. You could say that it was kind of a duty of Ashiata Shamash, or then the people who were working with him, to try to instill, again, you could almost talk like in terms of language of hope and faith, a real hope, faith, confidence in themselves, that this conscience was still present in them, so that they did have like a real hope, a real potential was still in them. So yeah,
people just need an example, don't they?
Yeah.
To look up to or to follow. And I know we're supposed to be doing this individually, but we all need help from other people.
Yeah. That's another thing, doesn't he? He mentions that, I suppose, that the idea or the hope being that if people are, are working on themselves in that way, like trying to connect with conscience in themselves, that hopefully, just by the results, you could say the fruits of their work on themselves, that hopefully that would have like an influence, or an influence could be exerted through them on the people around them, like they might not necessarily have to talk to the people about the ideas or anything, but maybe, like you're saying, just by their character or like their being, they could be a positive influence on people, so even that, again, the nature of that influence, like being to do with the subconscious, you can see that it can work obviously in a kind of a roundabout way. It could work in ways that aren't explicitly obvious, again, that don't have to necessarily be on the surface anything to do with the work or spirituality or anything like that, but just like, yeah, really working through the being, being able to affect people, you could say, by your being and affecting their being, so yeah, I guess that you'd be trying to help people to establish a connection with the conscience in themselves, develop a contact, and that would then be able to they would connect with some facilities in themselves, or resources that could hopefully lead them on the way, so they might be able to become their own teacher in a kind of way. Like you say, we always need help from other people, but there's definitely more potential to tap into like inner resources that we have ourselves that we're not currently kind of accessing,
And I think them 5 Obligonian strivings, like you say, they're like Gurdjieff's, everything he wants to try and tell us in 5 strivings, even though the book, it goes into it much more deeply. So you still need to read the book, even though you could perhaps have these 5 strivings, I don't know, written on a little card on you or on the wall, so you memorize them, and then they start, the more you read them, they start coming inside and working on you.
Yeah, I guess you could look at them, I suppose, the 5, the strivings. You could look at them as like trying to address all the different sides of man's being or his nature, like, like his body, like his physical nature and his emotions and his mind. And then like, yeah, also, aims or teachings designed at maybe his spiritual side. So they do seem to look like what he's looking for is that balance. Like, again, he talks about his teaching as a harmonious teaching. So something that can address these different sides of man, the different needs that each of the different sides has, its own kind of food or development, and being able to satisfy them in a balanced way, a beneficial way, so that it's not just developing one side at the expense of another. But yeah, they look balanced. They look like a classic, I suppose you could probably, find similarities with the basic like commandments or teachings of any of the great religions. You could probably map some of them over to like the noble truths of Buddhism, or like even like the 10 Commandments, or some of the teachings of Christ, like the Sermon on the Mount and things like that. So you could probably have your find your samenesses or your similarities there. So yeah, it does look like it's like you say, a distillation. It's like his Moses tablet that he's came down from the mountain with. Yeah.
Well, I want to first thank everybody for sending some questions in. Some were put on the community page, so you can look at them there if you don't quite catch what the questions are here. And some were sent to me by emails. And we hope to do another show like this another time, and I'll set up another community page for people to leave questions. But I will start off with one of the questions. So I'm not going to name check people today because I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do or not, but maybe you can let me know in the comments if you don't mind. So we've got a question. How should we approach emotional difficulties and trauma in our work? If one has trouble with relationships, What can we do to identify less? And this is something I struggle with lots myself. I have my own problems with this very question. You know, I struggle with relationships and trying not to identify with them. Uh, and I know Gurdjieff does explain ways of doing that in his work, but I'm going to pass this one over to you, Josh. So, how do we identify less with trouble with relationships, and how do we approach emotional difficulties and trauma in our work?
Yeah. Well, I suppose I'll just start with the emotional difficulties and trauma first. I suppose obviously since Gurdjieff presented his teaching over 100 years ago, there's obviously been lots of research and development and explorations into like psychology and different practices, and lots of the Gurdjieff ideas have filtered down into common like psychology and psychotherapy. You could definitely look at the evolution of psychology and psychotherapy and those kind of things from his time, and you can definitely see that that the influences from like Gurdjieff and people like Steiner and that have penetrated into the common culture. Again, whether they're kind of like explicit, whether people openly reference those ideas in their work or not, but there's definitely been an influence. So I would suggest that if you're dealing with particularly intense emotional difficulties or classic kind of trauma, then first of all, obviously I'd recommend just doing the common sense thing in terms of look into the different kind of modalities that are out there, the different techniques and ideas that are out there, explore that, because there are lots of I would say useful ideas and techniques out there from different schools of thought, like psychotherapy and things like that. And I think fairly recently, maybe a few years ago now, I think there was a book published by a guy called Russell Schreiber. I don't know how you pronounce his second name.
Yeah. So I have his book, The Psychology. I've got it over there. I can't quite see the title, but that is a really good book to read. He's in the Gurdjieff work, and he is a psychoanalyst.
Therapist. I think he's a psychotherapist, maybe an analyst, but yeah. So I was just going to mention something like that. So again, there's like a classic example of someone who's been involved in the Gurdjieff work for a significant period of time, and also who's explored like psychotherapy and psychoanalysis and became a therapist himself. So he's done some work in the book, and in his practice trying to utilize and like blend some of the ideas of Gurdjieff and things with other known ideas in psychotherapy. So that would be one possible kind of crossover thing to explore if that person hasn't looked into that.
And sometimes books like his help you to understand the Gurdjieff work when you are actually reading the Gurdjieff writing, because that can be quite in-depth, deep. Many people say it's very difficult to read Gurdjieff, especially Beelzebub's Tales. The next two books are written in a different way. But again, you still have to fathom the gist, as he says. But reading books that are written by other people that have studied the Gurdjieff work help you to decipher, or help one to decipher more.
Yeah. I mean, I even like particularly, I suppose, people who have that kind of crossover, like someone who's had a Gurdjieff influence and like a psychological influence. So they kind of somebody who's trying to marry those kind of things together. But even just exploring different psychological ideas that are out there, even if they have no explicit connection with the work, it can like feed back into your understanding of the work. Again, Gurdjieff talks about that. I think it's quoted in that story in I think it's in Search of the Miraculous, like after Ouspensky first meets Gurdjieff and first comes to the group, I think he gets handed that little piece of paper with a story on it. I think it's like glimpses of truth, it's called, something like that. So, and the guy's having a conversation with Gurdjieff in that, and I think he says to him like, the guy's talking to Gurdjieff and asking all these questions about esoteric things, and Gurdjieff gives him the answers that he can, but he says to him like, if you go away now and we meet again in a year's time, then presumably in the course of that year you'll have pondered on different ideas and maybe worked on yourself and things. And so if we talked again, you would be able, I might even give you the same answers that I gave to you before, but you would see a whole new layer of meaning in them, or you'd be able to get more out of them because you'd have worked on yourself in that time. So again, just that idea that you can study the fourth way and get heavily into it, but you can also use other teachings. You can leave the fourth way for to explore some other teachings, and they can and come back to the fourth way, or like reading Beelzebub's Tales after you've maybe had a break from it for a year or more, And again, that those things that you've looked into, those other avenues, can help you come to a greater insight into what you already think you know, in terms of the work. But yeah, I was going to say, in terms of emotions, a lot of and it's present in the work, and a lot of the different psychotherapies these days, a lot of them use the body as a primary means to help in emotional, dealing with traumatic emotions. And again, in a lot of the different like religious teachings, there's a lot of those ideas and practices, I suppose, like specifically in Taoism. Like again, they have the idea that different emotional states are connected with different organs of the body, like the heart and liver and things. And each of those organs can like facilitate, you could say, positive and negative sides of emotion.
It's like our physical body is telling us what's wrong inside.
Yeah. Well, they would say there's a kind of a physiological connection between particular emotions and the particular like organs of the body. So a lot of their Taoist practices then they involve trying to increase your awareness of the body, like your somatic awareness of the physicality of the body, and that obviously corresponds to a large degree with Gurdjieff's sensing practices. Like, he has quite a few of his exercises that they give involve sensing the body and developing the sensation in like being able to increase your sensation in localized parts of the body if you wish, and also like just your general or overall bodily sensation. And so a lot of those teachings use like increasing your awareness of your body as a way to, you could say, in your general life, if you're more aware of your body, then you have a bit of a kind of almost like an armor that'll help you maybe stop your emotions reaching such an intensity that they might otherwise if you didn't have a bodily presence. And also that you might be able to pick up on things quicker, like emotional rufflings that would become an outburst. You might be able to kind of like interrupt that process quicker if you've got some contact with your body. So a lot of those kind of therapies use that idea that if you develop your bodily awareness, it'll give you a kind of a grounding, and that might help your emotions not quite reach such a peak. Or again, it might just give you a kind of a sense of a foundation to be able to meet the emotions, even if it doesn't necessarily change the emotions that you're dealing with, the intensity of them. But if you have a presence in your body, you might feel a bit more confident or grounded to be able to deal with whatever the emotional situation is. And so that's one side of it. And also a lot of the teachings there's this idea now, I suppose more, I think fairly recently, that trauma is stored in the body. I suppose like,
yes,
a lot of the previous ideas it's all just been tied up in the mind. This idea that trauma is just like, something that's in the brain, brain damage, or it's just all to do with memories that are stored in the brain. But, kind of more modern science is suggesting that sort of picture of the brain and the body as these two kind of very distinct entities with different natures is kind of coming to be seen through that. You could look at the body, the whole body is like a whole brain. Do you know what I mean? Like you could look at the body, and like nowadays they have the idea of the gut brain and things like that. So they're looking into it, and it's so yeah. In that way of looking at it, there is the notion that trauma is not, and memory is not just stored in, say, your mind then, or your thinking, but literally in your sensations, in your somatic presence in your body. So if you start working with trying to increase your ableness to be aware of your body, not just like to be aware of it more often, but to increase the quality and like the depth, like develop your sensitivity, like the fineness, like, or the clarity that you could be aware of your body and your sensations, that can open up a form of contact with what is called the subconscious, so that you can use bodily sensation to access, like, say, previous memories or previous trauma. Like, obviously, particularly if what we're talking about is something that's involved physical trauma, like, sexual abuse and violence and things like that. And obviously in those memories, there's a very physical aspect because there was physical trauma involved in the experience. It wasn't just like mental abuse or emotional abuse. Of course, both mental abuse and emotional abuse can, give physical, you can feel them in your body, but obviously it's something different than physical abuse. So in accessing your sensation or becoming more aware of it, it can start to bring up memories that may have been repressed or not. So if someone wasn't kind of expecting that, that could possibly be, you know, be problematic, because of course the idea with trauma is that a lot of the time we've repressed those memories, or we kind of, you know, we want to keep it at bay because of the nature of it, because of how unpleasant it is.
Yeah, we
So
don't want to face them again.
yeah, so I mean, imagine someone who has trauma, you know, in their past, and then maybe they, you know, they've not haven't got any particular desires of trying to work with it or anything, and maybe they start doing some meditations that they came across, you know, just in a book or something, and it involves like being more aware of the body. Then they might find in their meditations that they could start to like have all these memories flooding back to them, or things could, like, you know, could be amplified. So that, you know, if they didn't know that that kind of thing could happen, that could maybe put them off, you know, doing meditations. And a lot of people are in that situation, not just necessarily because traumas or things come up, memories come up, but just because meditation can seem to give rise to like strange states and things like that. So people who might not be, you know, expecting that or have any context for that could be very fearful for it. But all I'm saying is, yeah, the body.
Many people don't warn you of that. When I first started meditations, nobody warned me of that, and I was like, maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this.
Yeah,
but it's really, it's a step. It's a step through it to get on to the next stage. You need to face, you know, the truth that's going on in your body and your mind.
Yeah, but just like you say, it's just that if you start doing some of those practices, you know, you could get strange experiences or results, and you might not necessarily have any context, isn't it? Especially if you know, if you're just by yourself, maybe you're doing it from a book or something. You know, who knows how you might react to it, you know, to some strange kind of experiences. But I was just going to say, yeah, using your body, developing your sensing, what Gurdjieff calls sensing, like the organic awareness of your body, like your breath and the blood and like the tissues and the different fluids and the electricity in the nervous system, all that you can increase your awareness of it, and that can have multiple beneficial effects. But yeah, definitely this idea that if you develop your bodily awareness, and particularly if you go in with that intention, like if you've got some trauma and you're like, I want to deal with this, you know, maybe I'm having flashbacks a lot of the time, you know, or nightmares or things like that, you know, these traumas, and I want to deal with it. Then that is one method you can use. You can sit down and set the intention, say maybe with a specific memory or trauma that you have that you want to work with, or maybe you're just opening it up in general. Just sit down and put the intention out there that you want to, you know, I'm here and I want to work with some of my, you know, traumas. So you can try and ask, if you like, your subconsciousness, try to make the connection with it, give it the intention that that's what you want to do. You're setting aside some time during the day, maybe like say when it's quiet and maybe you're by yourself, to like intentionally go there, you know, to make a space for like these traumas then, or things that might have been repressed, to come up and be addressed.
Their subconscious will listen to that, and won't it? And it will do. I know our conscious tries to distract us, but our subconscious is listening and will try and work on it.
Yeah, well, a lot of that just depends on how able, you know, we are to make that kind of contact or that communication. You could say that if the subconscious gets the message, then it will, you know, it will respond as best as it's able to that request. But you know, it's like having two radio sets, like our frontal consciousness and our subconsciousness. They're each like, you know, have their own radio set, and they're sending out their, you know, their signals. But there could be a lot of like static or distortion in between them. So often communications aren't received or sent, or they're received in a distorted form. You see what I mean? So that can be the problem, developing that, you know, our kind of means of communication between our frontal consciousness and what he calls our subconscious. And again, that is a big thing in the work, trying to develop that connection, being able to kind of increase our intentional ability to make an intentional contact, to like communicate wishes or, you know, aims and things to the subconsciousness, so that it can participate. Because it's like you can't do it on our own. Like our frontal consciousness hasn't got enough consciousness hasn't got enough resources to be able to kind of do what we need to do. So we need to tap into like that side of us to receive extra help. But so what I would say you could do is you could sit there and do whatever, like, you know, kind of preparation that you maybe find suitable in order to like come into a bit of a relaxed state, you know, a more beneficial state to begin. And then you could use like a Gurdjieff exercise in terms of like, you know, he has these relaxation exercises where you go through the body and you try and relax like your large muscles, and then like the small, medium muscles and small muscles, and, you know, go like right from your head to your toes. So you could do something like that, get yourself into what you feel to be a relaxed and kind of like positive state, you know, a state that you would like to be in, say, most of the time, you know, clear-headed, you know, positive emotions, level-headed, whatever. Try to get into a state like that. And then you could intentionally bring up the memory, say that you might have a traumatic memory, right? So you intentionally, whilst you're relaxed, then make the effort to bring up this memory. And of course, that memory, particularly if it's kind of involves some kind of physical suffering, well, by remembering it, obviously that will want to change the state that I'm in. If I'm in a relaxed state and I bring up a memory that's full of tension and, you know, fear and things like that, then obviously that will want to change my bodily state from relaxed to, you know, fearful then.
Yeah.
So you can try to hold those two things at the same time, the relaxed state that I'm in now in the present in the body, and also try to really, as much as I'm able, allow the state that was present in the memory to be present, you know, now, like fully go into it in my memory and try to fully experience it. So in that sense, you're trying to experience this kind of contradiction, in the sense you're trying to experience the relaxed state in the present and also fully kind of experience the state, the mental, physical state that was there in the, you know, the memory. And then it's like you try to hold them before yourself and try to make that communicate to your subconsciousness that you want this present relaxed state to, you could say, to overwrite the state that's present in the memory. It's almost like you want to be able to like revisit yourself in the memory
without
like
having
almost
the trauma and the old past emotions and everything coming up.
Well, it'd be almost like you want to, like, you know, it'd be like, imagine the analogy of time travel. It's like you'd want to almost be able to travel into the past, into that memory, and like be like a voice in your ear, which would be able to kind of like coax you through whatever the traumatic experience was. Do you know what I mean? So you'd be trying to communicate to your past self, or you could just say the memory, you know, in order to communicate, like you could say, like some comfort, or, you know, let them know that it was going to be okay, or all that kind of thing. You see what I mean? So you can use your body for that. You can bring up the memory and allow it to start to trigger the bodily sensations and feelings and things that were present in the memory, and at the same time try to maintain a relaxed state. You know, again, it's a contradiction in terms, and try to communicate to yourself and to your subconsciousness that any time that memory comes up, that you want to remain relaxed. You don't want it to like affect your feelings and your sensations in the present. You see what I mean? So you can start to make like, I suppose they talk about it now in terms of like rewiring the brain. You can start to make new neural connections where if those memories come up, then they won't tap into your present feelings and sensations as much as they maybe previously did. Do you see what I mean? Like you can be able to have the memory, but not evoke the same kind of feelings and sensations as it previously did. Because
this is
kind
breaking the patterns that Gurdjieff's talking about, and he's here to help us break patterns.
Yeah.
Patterns on and do the same thing over and over, or bring the same
for
a certain scene, so that we can live in that, you know, whatever traumatic emotion again, or, you know, like he says, we like our suffering, even though we don't. We know deep down we want to be healed.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be like trying to break the patterns in terms of our outer actions, but also our patterns of like you know, thinking and feeling and memory. So yeah, that's one side, to break our habits, and also the side of it in terms of just dealing with, like, you could say, trauma. You could say that in essence everybody is traumatized, just to different degrees. So we've all experienced things that are, you could say, extremely contradictory. Like you could say that the essence of like trauma and those kind of things, other than being just like painful, there's an extreme contradiction in them. Like, again, the example, like maybe if I've been physically abused by like a parent or something, then there's a massive contradiction there in terms of the idea of a parent who's supposed to be like a caregiver and, you know, someone who you look to for love, but then having that relationship with them is like, you know, maybe being physically beaten by them or whatever. So it's not just like an unpleasant experience, but there's a very painful contradiction in trauma, and it's that kind of like unreconciled contradiction that repeats itself in different ways because it hasn't been reconciled, you know. So again, that's like another thing in the work. We have this idea of the need for reconciliation, that we have to use the three forces in a kind of intentional, conscious way in order to be able to reconcile these dualities that that naturally crop up, or that we'll be under the sway of, unless we do work to try to, you know, to develop.
Well, that was a fantastic answer. Brilliant. And I hope people get a lot from that. I'm going to go on to some more questions. So we've got here, what useful first steps a person interested in the work can undertake? What kind of actions, on the contrary, would definitely be a mistake? And I do see this, I hear this from a lot of people. They're worried they're doing things wrongly. And I always thought that you would know if you were doing something wrongly. Maybe there'd be some kind of niggling in you that this isn't quite right. What do you think on that?
Well, I suppose like if you're talking about someone who's, let's say then, who's just come across, you know, the ideas of the work or something, then, and particularly if there's someone who's relatively maybe isolated, in the sense that maybe they're meeting the ideas in the form of a book that they've got out from the library or come across. So they're not like maybe meeting it in the sense of a group or in the context of a load of people who they've met who are interested in those ideas. So like if you specifically talk about someone who's come across the ideas kind of by themselves, then yeah, that could be a big thing, because even in the ideas, Gurdjieff often says, like, don't try anything unless, you know, you kind of like know what you're doing, or, you know, so he often makes these kind of apparent, you know, contradictory statements. Like, you know, on the one hand, he can appear to affirm just that anybody can benefit from some kind of effort of work on themselves. But he also says that there are such things as like wrong crystallization. So
yes, I was about to say that. I think that's what people are concerned about. I get a lot of emails about that. I don't know if I'm crystallizing wrongly, and I just say back to them, as long as you're not doing anything evil or bad, hopefully you're not. But I suppose some people are still concerned that they're not doing it right.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's probably just, you know, it's probably like a basic human concern, isn't it, that comes into everything. We can just, you know, am I living rightly? Am I doing, you know, people often have that, you know, am I good enough or whatever, or am I clever? But, you know, that can enter into all sorts of things. But yeah, I mean, obviously, according to him, then in the position that we are when we start the work, we're kind of like, you know, very unconscious and mechanical, and, you know, subject to our own kind of distortions and illusions. So yeah, it seems inevitable that you're going to obviously make there's going to be some mistakes or some issues, because that's just the nature of, you know, the nature of the work or learning. So, you know, you could try to set out without being too fearful, you know, just trying to be realistic. Let's say, okay, well then, yeah, I probably am going to make some mistakes, or I might, you know, crystallize wrongly, or I might crystallize rightly. But I mean, you try to take those ideas, you know, on board when I begin, to see what I mean. Like if I'm able to make a kind of a conscious decision that, you know, to start this work with my eyes open as much as possible, then that might free me up from a lot of these kind of concerns that could possibly like paralyze me. You know, I might, again, like Gurdjieff talks about sitting between two stools. It's like, yeah, I don't like where I am. I recognize I need to do something. And then I come across this teaching, but I might have resistances in terms of like maybe not having other teachers for help, or just having doubts, you know, about the work or about myself. So
yeah,
we could be
worthy kind of thing. I think a lot of people have that, and we're all worthy of doing it if we really I'm going to say throw ourselves into it. If we're dedicated, if we, like Gurdjieff calls it, make it small aims that will lead to your bigger aims. You've got to want to do it. You've got to desire to do it.
Yeah,
don't
yeah. I was
let
just
the ego take you over. Sorry.
Yeah. I was just going to say that if you try to go in with your eyes open again, as obviously as much as that's possible to begin with, then and like take it on knowing that there are these risks and etc., then you might be, if you take that on, try to make the decision saying, yes, maybe this is a risky enterprise in the sense that I don't know what the results are going to be, or the results aren't guaranteed, or, you know, I could come across a teacher who I think is a teacher or isn't, or there's all sorts of possibilities. But if I take the work on kind of knowing that or accepting that, then again, it might free me up from a lot of those concerns, that can kind of become paralyzing in the sense that I don't, I get in that position of hesitation, kind of neither doing one thing or the other, neither just forgetting about the work or kind of actually, maybe taking it on in a more sort of, committed way.
But then we need that hesitation to make that, don't we? It's kind of like them stop hinders. It's like having that hesitation, as you say, you can either then step back and not have anything to do with it, or you go forward more committed. It does change things.
Yeah, well, I suppose that hesitation, it gives you the opportunity to confront yourself. Do you see what I mean? Again, like I have these hesitations. It's like, again, like it's like stepping into the unknown or stepping like off a cliff in the dark. You don't know how where the bottom is. It could be 100 feet. It could be a foot. So, you have to, you make your decision. If I at the moment where I make that decision and just leap off the precipice, it's kind of you can't have any worries at that moment because you've already committed. It's only the worries kind of like a prior to that. So I know what you mean. The hesitations may be needed for us to be able to go through them to make a decision. You see what I mean? It's like I have to maybe take into account the reality of the problems or the negative potentials, take them seriously in order to like make a true decision that will enable me to, kind of take responsibility. You see what I mean? Like a lot of those questions come up because I'm not able to take responsibility for myself. You know what I mean? Like I'm too scared in case I do something wrong and I don't want to be subject to the results of my decision. To see what I mean? So we're getting that point where we kind of don't want to do anything in case we do something wrong. Whereas it's probably the opposite attitude that might be needed in a way. Like
just gotta go for it.
Go for it. But if I go for it in a way that I'm kind of like, know that I'm not guaranteed, then I might not suffer as much. I'm kind of taking responsibility for my decisions if I do fuck up or not,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is a big thing. If I can try to take responsibility. If I am going to make a decision to do some work or these practices and I'm doing it not knowing or maybe being a bit unsure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, then just try to take the moment to make your choice. Do I want to do nothing? Or am I going to do this? And if I make my decision, then try to accept it as my decision. I can't put pass the blame onto anybody else. But in terms of things to do, then like he does talk about the non-expression of negative emotion as a big thing and a general thing that people can do that in theory, at least, it's something that people can engage in that shouldn't be able to lead to too many problems or something that they might not be so easy to kind of mess up. Like he says, it's something that a person can work on, that it should be fairly safe for them to work on without kind of them developing some kind of like strange alternative habits. So the non-expression of negative emotion, that's something that we all can recognize in ourselves. Just whatever little, just observe whatever triggers we have, whether it's people or particular situations, in our lives, and just try to, first of all, obviously draw our attention to that. Just try to recognize the things that trigger us, more, particularly big triggers, whatever the big issues are, big things that bring out my most intense emotions. Then trying to be aware of that in my life, and if possible, to make the effort in those times where maybe I see these emotions are, building up in me and are likely to, to be expressed, then to try to make an effort not to express them. That's a simple thing that we can do. That it doesn't seem to involve like any strange things in like, it's not like involving some kind of strange meditation or like altering your breath or anything like that. It's a kind of a simple thing that in one sense we do to an extent in normal life. Like if I'm in a situation, maybe I don't like my boss, maybe it's just the nature of types, or just something in me just doesn't like him. But obviously I have to deal with him. So maybe in certain situations I have to not express, like maybe he's pissing me off maybe it's just somebody who rabbits on all the time and I get annoyed by him talking. But I have to like go, yeah, and pretend to be interested. So we have those kind of opportunities in life for like the non-expression of negative emotion and like conscious acting and those kind of things. So we are doing those things to an extent. So they're simple efforts that we can make in our daily life. The non-expression of negative emotion, and trying to look into what it is, in us that, or why it is that we're triggered that way. If I have a particular person in my life who every time I meet them, they bring up these saying like, negative emotions in me, then I can
Put
try
on
to
your corns, as Mr. Gurdjieff.
yeah, exactly. Then they provide the opportunity not just in the moment to try to make an effort not to like express my negative emotions, but I can also make the effort to try to see what is it really, despite all I might have a lot of talk about what it is, but try to see really what is it that brings out those emotions in me. Just so like, self-inquiry, that's another simple thing we can do. And again, I would mention that with the bodily awareness, that's another thing that's a big thing that he emphasized in the beginning of the work, like the need to kind of begin work with the body, like be more aware of our body throughout our day. And if possible, when we are aware of our bodies, to try to reduce any unnecessary tensions. Like he says, a lot of our energies apparently is wasted in unnecessary tension of the muscles, either over tensing them or tensing muscles that aren't even engaged just from habit. Like it's like we develop a lot of habitual postures and ways of moving, I suppose, from the people around us, or we just develop our own. And a lot of them are very, like say, inefficient, or even just like
wasting energy,
or just through the nature of like our kind of, there's some distortion in our like fight or flight system. So a lot of the time we have these kind of like, we're almost all nearly always on edge, so there's always these like bodily contractions going on places in this that are like, almost waiting to be jumped out or slapped or something, So there's a lot of things we can do with the body that way in terms of like, sensing the body and relaxing the body during our daily life, or just trying to have more of a contact with my body in my daily life can possibly help in a lot of ways that we wouldn't expect, like again, it can possibly help us with our emotions or maybe thoughts and other things. So that's another thing that I would say that people can do without, much hesitancy of doing anything, wrong or messing themselves up. And also the exercise of intentional like contemplation, pondering, that was another big thing that he kind of advised people to do, trying to develop like he gave lots of mental exercises when they were in Fontainebleau, like different kinds of complicated mental exercise, like different kinds of counting, like in order and then reversing it, or different kinds of visualization exercises. So the different ways that you can develop the kinds of thought that you have, the kinds of things that you can do with your mind. You're not like just like trying to make yourself more clever, but you're developing the kind of the intentional contact that you have with your own mind, or like how you're able to use your mind. So there are a couple of simple things I suppose that people could do. Like if you find any ideas or mental exercises, and again, there's some in the Gurdjieff work, like Joseph Aziz, he brought out his book, and there's also I think a book by Araj that someone brought out, like some collected exercises that Araj, wrote down.
Yeah, that was by, who brought that out? I've got that here somewhere. Oh, I'll remember in a minute. Paul Taylor brought out a book on Araj.
Right.
Yes. So, and there's others as well.
Yeah,
but
and so
it's interesting you brought up about pondering, because I did a show on pondering, and I had lots of emails about, I don't know which voice I'm listening to, because obviously we've got all the different eyes in us. You've got to find, it's something we have to work on, make sure they're not ones that are going to try and distract us from doing the work. Listen to the ones that are helping you, but you get to learn them as you work on it. I think too many people are looking for a ta-da moment, and it's not like that. It's very subtle, isn't it? And you have to do these different types of exercises. And as you were saying about, relaxing the body, the way that once you start learning to do that exercise, then you start hearing your voice or your inner mind talking away, and then you've got to wait for it to shut up or ignore it, so that silence comes through, and then you listen to that. That is revelatory when that happens.
Like you say, that they all those exercises and those, not just in the Gurdjieff work, like obviously different traditions, all the traditions have various exercises for different things, and I think they all, you could find useful exercises in any of them. But
they're
like you say,
practices, because you have to practice them.
Well, but like you said, you can, I suppose, get to know yourself better in the sense that you can, through those practices, you can come to distinguish, I suppose, more between what, a voice, let's say, that might be just, of the general level, or something that you've heard, you know what I mean, some ideas that you've acquired from somewhere, and like your mind just mechanically suggests you, and a deeper like insight, like you said, you can learn that. But it's only something you can learn yourself from inside, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's only going to be you at the end of the day who's going to have to decide between whether something is like an egoic suggestion or is like an insight from above or something like that. But definitely you can develop a kind of a taste for that, you know, where it can become more obvious to you if something's got a bit more weight to it, or if it's just like, you know, a piece of information that's just automatically coming up or that you've heard from somewhere else. But yeah, definitely. And like pondering, you can use pondering in different ways, you know. Obviously there's all sorts of things you could ponder about, but obviously particularly particularly taking ideas that that you have some emotional resonance with. Like obviously it's likely that there's going to be some ideas that are more appealing to you to contemplate about than others, aren't they? So particularly if you're going to find an idea that has for you kind of stimulates quite, you know, a lot of emotions or an, you know, more intense emotion, then that's probably a good idea to ponder on. Or like taking an opinion or a thought that you have and again going into questioning why you maybe have that thought or that opinion and trying to find out where it's came from or what's led to you having that. You know, I think in Views from the Real World, I think Gurdjieff gives a kind of an exercise there where he asks them to think about something, like some phenomena, and he sets out like I think about 10 points, and he asks them to think in a specific series or ask these specific questions in this specific order about whatever it is that you've chosen to think about. So there's some different kind of mental exercises that we can do there.
Well, I'm going to go on to another question now. Actually, this is more of a comment, and I'm going to deal with this one. So we've got this. How can you show that Gurdjieff did not make a mistake by leaving out the sixth stopinder in the food octave in Holy Planet Purgatory? So this is more for people that have definitely read Beelzebub's Tales. But I did do a show about this with Dylan Stevens, and that's called Was Mr. Gurdjieff Wrong in Purgatory? So you can find that in my video list. So the answer to that should be there, or something for you to ponder on. So we're going to go into another question. Someone was asking, how quickly I think they mean how quickly is a person's transformation supposed to happen by applying Gene's instructions? And then they say year, 10 years, lifetime. And I think there is no time limit. It's down to the individual, surely. You can't say you're going to have all this done, because it depends on how much practice you put in, how much you put into doing this work, how much you read the books and fathom the gist, as Gurdjieff calls it, how much you apply yourself to doing this. And do you think there's a time limit to it? Or not a time limit,
no.
but no, there isn't, is there? It could take all your life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a, like, you know, I don't think there's an expected, you know, time frame where certain, you know, certain development should have happened, because like obviously people can be born with different capabilities and they can be born into different conditions which might be more or less favorable for like that kind of work, and people can have different, you know, fates. So it's not appropriate for everybody to achieve the kind of the same stage or level or point of development, because you could say if you achieve what is your fate, then you could say that you've kind of achieved what is right for you. So the, you know, in terms of the development of the work, rather than like you setting your sights on like, I don't know, a Keston body or this or that, it'd be better to try to wish for what is your, like, the development that's possible for you, or like you could say your God-given potential or something, like, you know, again, there is the idea that everybody has a certain, could say, potential that's given to them, and obviously that varies between people, you know, person to person. Like that, you know, the analogy with the mustard seeds in the Bible, you know, people have different potentials, so it's not maybe necessary or required for everybody to achieve the same development. And if it's like equally valuable, like if you're destined to reach man number 7 and I'm destined to reach man number 5, let's say, then if I achieve man number 5 and you achieve man number 7, then we've both equally achieved the same thing. Yeah, because we've both contributed what was the most we could. Do you see what I mean? That's it. So rather than look at it in terms of like levels that we can compare, I'd say if you could work towards trying to find out whatever might be your own, you know, individual potential. But
I think people ask this question because, and I've been asked this quite a few times by people, is because many people come out of school or college where they get you to do this. I don't even know what to call it. And they say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And people have even come up to me when they first met me and got to know me. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I think that kind of pressure is put on people to think they have to put in every part of their life. And you don't in this kind of work. There is no end sell by date, as they call it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like you're saying, it's a tricky one because, you know, there's those ideas in one sense that spiritual development is something different than like material development, in the sense that it's a different process than if I was just trying to like develop a physical skill, like trying to play a guitar or learn to be a bricklayer or something. Obviously there are crossovers, like there are similarities between spiritual work and physical work, but obviously there are some differences between the very nature of physicality and spirituality. So in one sense, yeah, the development is a very practical, and you could say linear process that in one sense reflects like how we grow and develop or learn in daily life, physical tasks or skills. But obviously, on the other hand, there's something very different about it. So a lot of these ideas, you know, turn up in the work and other teachings in terms of like ideas about not being attached to results and like trying to be able to work without being attached or concerned with the results, which of course in our kind of normal practical mindset, that's very difficult for us to do, because
that's what we're taught to do.
Yeah, we're taught that the, you know, the validity of doing whatever we do is judged by the results. You see what I mean? So we tend to only want to be willing to engage in something if I think that it's going to give a result, you know. So that obviously that mindset conditions how we approach everything, and particularly it's probably inappropriate to the work, you know, if we're just kind of thinking about it in kind of very materialistic terms, or in a way that completely mirrors like physical processes of learning, or how we develop physical skills. And also they talk about the spiritual development being non-linear in terms of, well, it involves dimensions kind of outside of what we call linear time. So you could say by its very nature, it's not going to be a strictly linear process. It's going to, you know, it's going to be something that's more kind of multidimensional than that, you know.
Well, what went with this question also, which I think is quite important, they asked, did any of the students acquire a soul? It's not for us to be able to tell whether students acquired a soul, but is it possible to tell if I have a soul or not? Now, I think if you're doing this work, then you have got a soul. Gurdjieff talks about how everyone's born with a kernel of soul, aren't they?
Yeah.
And it's whether we develop it through our conscience or our wanting to become, whether people ignore the soul and let it die, or whether they go forth and grow it. It's normally people that have a soul are those that are looking at this kind of spiritual work or any kind of spiritual work and have a conscience. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is that saying, isn't there, from the work? Again, I don't know if Gurdjieff got it from elsewhere, you know, but it's like, you know, blessed is he who has a soul, and blessed is he who doesn't have a soul, but like, you know, woe and strife to the person who's got it in the making, or is in the process of the development of the soul. So
that's us, because we're
well, I mean, you could say by the very fact that you're like asking those questions, you know, and particularly if you're asking them from a place that's, you know, feels like a deep interest or something that's, you know, a real question for you, a real issue, not just like, oh, I've read it in a book, we might have a soul or not. It's a matter of curiosity. But if it's something that really bothers you, then you could say by the very fact that it bothers you, then you could say, well, it suggests that you're in that category, at least, where you're probably in the process. You know, again, there's no guarantees there, but at least you're, you know, you could take some kind of heart or positivity from the fact that you're asking the question. The fact that it bothers you is probably a good sign. You know what I mean? But I was going to say that a lot of the time when we ask those questions, like, you know, how would I know if I have had a soul or not, or those kind of things, that again, they kind of asked from the sort of mindset of our not kind of like our normal knowledge, you know, like it's kind of like we're conditioned a lot into the sort of modern scientific outlook in various ways these days. And a lot of that's based, like you're saying, in a particular way of looking at things or doing things. And it's based in the world of knowledge, this idea that you can that everything's a matter of fact. You know, everything can be known, you could say then, potentially. So everything's just like, yeah, it's true or false, you know what I mean? Whereas again, the work might not be able to be, the work might present questions that can't really be answered in like a true or false fashion. It might present questions that go beyond that, or just like with the soul, then again, people can ask that question in the sense that they're imagining the soul as like some kind of phenomena or artifact, which you might be able to be described to you beforehand, like what it looks like. This is, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then they might think, they're hoping that they'll come to some experience that matches the description, and then they can buy that. They can say, oh yeah, well, this matches the description of soul, so I must have a soul. But you could say, obviously, the very nature of the thing in question, it's not something that's going to be separate to you in that same way that you can kind of study as like an artifact. It's not, you know, it's not going to be something that you're going to be able to verify for yourself in that same kind of way as if, like, you know, someone asks you, have you got feet or not? You know, well, yeah, I looked down and I said, well, yeah, I seem to have feet, you know, because it's not something that can be described to you, or you could kind of know in advance. And I would say it's something, again, that's beyond the distinction of kind of true or false or knowledge. It's not going to be something that you're going to know. It seems a strange thing to suggest, because people will say, well, if you have a soul, you must know if you've got one, and if you don't, then I suppose maybe you should equally know or not. But I just mean it's something that's not really
well, people don't
really
contemplate it, do they?
well, if they do, but I mean, I'd say it's probably something that's not going to be of the realm of knowledge. You could say it's more something like being. You could say it'd be more like something that you could be or not be. And obviously, like, your being is something that extends beyond your knowledge, you know, like, you know, whatever you know about yourself, however self-knowledge you've got, and we would probably say that obviously it's limited. I maybe don't know everything about myself, but regardless of what I know about myself, you could say I still am myself. So, you know, I'm being myself regardless of my self-knowledge. You see what I mean? So the soul, it's a kind of, you know, just a way of talking about it, but it's probably more going to be something like that, of the realm of being, let's say, than the knowledge. You know, I would say that, yeah, if you've got a soul, again, the language "got a soul" is completely inadequate, because it's not, like I say, it's not a possession in the normal sense of something that we can, you know, I've got a soul, like it's something like a,
me.
yeah, it's not something. Yeah, it's not something I could put on my mantelpiece and, you know, adore and feel good about myself. So it's something you can, you know, kind of evaluate in that normal way. But yeah, I would say that if you've got a soul, you'll know, because those kind of like
this work.
well, the development of those higher bodies, like if we're talking about the soul as a particular, like you say, everybody's got a soul in the sense that they have this, like, this germ or this potential. But yeah, there's maybe no guarantee whether that develops, or there may be degrees of how much it does develop or can develop. So if we're talking about the soul as in terms of a particular kind of development that can occur, the seed that said everybody can develop, and I'd say, yeah, you'll know about it in the sense that it represents a transformation. You know, there'll be some radically new element to kind of like your experience. You know, like with the Keston body, you could say that if you start having experiences of, let's just say then, like, things to do with the astral realm, like, you know, classic things like outer body experiences and stuff like that, like, you'll recognize that because you haven't had those experiences before. You know, there'll be something that's obvious. You know, if you've never had an out of body experience, then you suddenly start to have out of body experiences, well, you'll recognize something different just by the very fact of things. Yeah, but how you might label that, or how you understand that experience, of course, that can be, you know, there can be varieties there, whether you link this, oh, this must be an astral body, or this must be a soul, or maybe you have no context for it. But I would say, in terms of the kind of experience that they, you know, represent, then I'd say, yeah, you'll know about it, because there'll be a radically new element to your experience. Will be enriched. You see what I mean? You know, you not just acquire like a new understanding, but you'll become able to do different things, and your world, there'll be new content, to your world,
So let's all go forth and develop our souls. Right, I'm going to do the last ones are, so this comes from one guy, but he's got a couple of questions. Can you share some practical examples of when a person is living their life mainly out of false personality? And I know myself, everybody wants to know what their false personality is. I get people asking me all the time, what's my false personality? And it's like,
right.
well, I'm not Gurdjieff, I can't tell you. And then he asked, any advice on helping ourselves and others to be less mechanical? Now, my answer to that question would be observation of yourself.
Yeah.
So, to be less mechanical, you've got to look at why you're being mechanical, and when you catch yourself being mechanical, and observe yourself and try and change it so you're not mechanical.
Yeah, I suppose with the false personality, I suppose, I mean, you could just describe false personality and say, well, it's the misworking or the misuse, exaggerated misworking or misuse of personality. Like, Gurdjieff says we have these two sides of us that we're born with. We have a side of us that's like essence, which is kind of like pre-incarnation, what we come in with, and we have personality, which is to do with what we acquire whilst we're incarnated. Like, a personality is of the earth, the realm of the earth, whereas essence is said to be of the realm of the planets. Personality
kind of comes from your peers, your families, how you develop from what you've learned from them and copied from them or whatever.
Yeah, he specifically ties it to all the different things that you acquire from the realm of the earth, from, you could say, from your encounters with people. So I'd say that the personality, it very much ties to your physical nature. Again, it's of the earth in terms of like the world. It's put on the level of the earth. So you could say that it's very much tied to the nature of your physical body and physical existence. It's like you need a personality to be able to interact on the physical realm. Like Gurdjieff says, we use our personality in order to interact with other people. And one of the primary reasons is because we're not, at least maybe as we're born, then we're not developed enough, let's say, then in our essence to be able to interact with people from our essences or through our essences. We need this kind of intermediary means of the personality to establish some kind of mutual relations and some kind of semi-understanding, and be able to work together and create a basic sort of culture. So we need a personality to engage in our earthly life, and it kind of serves, at least partially serves, a role of compensation for the fact that when we're born, our essence is born in a kind of undeveloped state, and because of the way things are, it doesn't kind of naturally, start growing or developing in the way that it should. So we need like this personality to kind of take over. It serves a sort of, compensatory role of authority. So you could just look at the false personality as, whatever would be like a misworking of your personality. And you could say that, your personality is a means for you to acquire worldly knowledge, knowledge of the world and of people, which then hopefully you can, through work on yourself and pondering and those kind of things, that you might be able to kind of digest some of that material with your essence. So it's like the personality can get exposed to certain influences and ideas, which then potentially the essence could be useful food for your essence. So you could look at your false personalities, any working of the personality which doesn't serve, the feeding of your essence, and that could reflect in, all sorts of ways. I mean, a classic external expression of it would be living in a situation like a job or an environment, living with people who were the wrong people to be around in terms of what you needed for your essence. You see what I mean? It's like your essence has certain requirements and it's chucked into life. You have to be born somewhere to certain parents, blah, blah, blah. So there's limitations in terms of how the life that you're born into and the circumstances and the people that you come across, how much that can, mirror the needs of your essence. And further, obviously, when we become responsible adults, at least theoretically, we become able to make decisions in terms of the people who we want to be around, the places we want to go, and things like that. So it's quite possible that through the misworking of personality, that those decisions that we make in terms of like maybe the kind of job I want to have or the place that I want to live, the people who I want to be around, we could make choices that are coming from this kind of inverted working or distorted working personality, which don't provide the kind of, the influences and the situations that we kind of need for our growth, or that most correspond to our growth. So a lot of the time people can stay in jobs, let's say, then, or stay in relationships and things for various reasons when they're not, beneficial. Yeah, they could be there for feet. Yeah, there could be people could stay in the job because, I'm scared that if I leave this job, I won't be able to get another job, or I won't be able to earn any money, or maybe stay with this abusive partner because I'm scared of being on my own, or I'm scared of what the neighbors will say if we break up and things like that. So a lot of the resistances that prohibit us from making changes that could be positive in our lives, and which we could say from it's a classic thing that we can see other people better than ourselves. So I might be looking at a relationship and it might be quite obvious to me that that's a toxic relationship between two people, and I may be saying to her, you should get out of there, he's not worth it, you can do better than that, So certain situations,
to her, it's a different thing.
So
going on the way she's seeing it.
Like things can appear to be common sense. Like maybe everybody who sees that relationship from outside sees that it's bad. So maybe there is a validity to all those people's perceptions that maybe it's objectively bad for her to stay in that relationship. And in that sense, it would be like a matter of common sense that, it's obviously not good for you, get out. But a false personality in that situation would be involved in all those kind of ways that we could avoid seeing the common sense of the situation, that this is actually bad for me, or all the justifications that we could have for not getting out of it, or for twisting it and seeing it as good, And I think a classic example in Search for the Miraculous of you could say the false personality would be what he calls internal considering.
Internal considering, yeah.
As opposed to external considering. So again, the classic example of internal considering would be maybe I'm sitting at a table, a dinner party, and somebody's talking, and maybe just telling a story from their life or something, and I might just be going over in my head about ideas about how much of an idiot he is, or maybe I wish he'd just shut up.
Judging, yes.
He's I wish he'd shut up so I could speak, or that kind of thing. So internal considering, it's all the kind of stuff that goes on in our heads generally, judging other people and the situations, and it's all based around what I want, in the sense of what pleases me the most or makes me the most comfortable. In the situation where the other person at the dinner party is talking and maybe regaling everyone with a tale, maybe I don't like that because I want to be the center of attention of the party, so maybe I start judging him as stupid or wanting him to shut up or whatever. So internal considering it's
an important part of it.
Well, it's trying to manipulate the situation to what I think is best for me or my personal wants. And rather than external considering, which is kind of based in trying to be able to, you could say, help people or be aware to the needs of others or the needs of the situation that go beyond my personal preferences. I could go to a dinner party and maybe I'm just engaged in the conversation, and I want to tell my story. So I've got this story, something funny happened to me, so I can't wait to get it out, and I'm just waiting to tell my story. I'm not really paying much attention to the host as she's going around trying to clean up the tables and things like that. Whereas if I went in with external consideration, then I could not be so bothered about the things that I maybe want to get out of the dinner party or blah blah blah, and just be more alert to ways I could help.
You'll be engaging properly and in an awake manner with what's going on around you.
Well, external considering it's geared towards others, trying to see what might be able to help another person, or see an objective need, trying to put my attention more on that rather than my personal judgments and my personal preference and what I want. So internal considering could be a classic example of false personality, in the sense it takes a mechanism. You could say it's the same mechanism that I'm using when I'm looking at the guy who's telling his story and I'm just judging him and waiting for my opportunity to come in and talk. It's the same kind of mechanism I'm using there to when I'm trying to look around me and see what I could be doing to help the host. It's the same kind of level of attention that you're using. It's just being focused in different ways. You know, like I'm using my personality in internal considering just to, you know, just for my own, like you could say benefit, but it's not really for my own benefit because it's just keeping me again in my habitual circle of reaffirming and getting what I want. You know what I mean? All my habitual interpretations of other people in the world. So you could say they both use internal and external considering. They both use like kind of like the personality, and it's kind of like you could say form of attention almost, but they just use it in like opposite ways. So if you find yourself again, like say you find yourself constantly reacting in the same ways when you're interacting with the same person, like I meet this person and he always just gets me aggravated, and even when I see him coming down the road before I've met him, it's evoked all these like feelings in me. I'm already pissed off before I've met him. Just, you know what I mean? So if I'm approaching people from that like habitual way, then you could say that you're approaching them from your false personality, because it's all based on your previous partial reactions to people in the past, rather than if I tried to get into like a proper working of personality, then it's not so much based on memory. It can account for memory. Like I can take into it can remember how maybe this person has treated me in the past or how I've reacted to them, but it's able to, you could say it's able to forget that in the sense that it's able to meet them from the present. It can take in mind, okay, maybe they've acted this way in the past, and maybe they're likely to act that way again, but I'm able to meet them still afresh from the moment, you know, you could say like give them a second chance. So yeah, if you find yourself reacting to people or situations very habitually, like meeting people, you know, say, oh, well, here comes so-and-so again, you know, then yeah, you're probably reacting from your false personality rather than your personality, which is your personality is just, it's really just supposed to be able to help you notice what's going on in the moment. You know, like it's to do with that level of attention that you could notice. Like if your personality is working properly, it's like I can look at the computer screen now and I'll actually see it, rather than like, you know, normally I can look at the screen and not see it. Or like if I'm looking for my keys and they're on the table and I look at the table and I don't see the keys, and then I come back and look at the table and I do see the keys. Again, the difference there is like the personality in terms of its functioning. Like when it's not functioning properly, you won't kind of you won't see
operate properly.
Well, you won't see what's going on in your immediate environment. It's like when my personality is not working properly, I won't see what's in front of my face. You see what I mean? I won't actually see what's actually there. So personality is tied, again, like we said, it's kind of like tied to the physical world, but it doesn't just apply to your sense perception. It's also applies to your feeling and your thoughts. But it's supposed to give us a sort of a degree of say impartial noticing in the moment, like whether it's a noticing of a sensation or a thought or a feeling, but just that position where you actually do see what's in front of your face rather than not seeing it or seeing something else. You know, that's where kind of false personality comes into it.
Right, so everybody look out for your false personalities. This is actually the last question. I'd saved this one especially for last and forgotten that I was going to do this. This question is, how can the work be presented to remain alive and important in the 21st century? And I'd like to think that shows like this are trying to keep the work alive. Obviously, there's other people also writing books. You have your Beelzebub Tapestry WordPress that keeps the work alive. There are other ways of keeping the work alive, but it's really about keeping the work alive in you. Because if you put the work in you and keep it alive in you, it will filter out to other people. Other things will feel it, won't they? And you'll be part of the harmonious development of the cosmos. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah. Well, like definitely, obviously, yeah. I mean, being able to keep the work alive or make it, you know, present it in a way that's relevant for the current times requires people. So it's like I required, like you were saying, to keep the work, you know, alive in me. And I suppose you could say that there might be a responsibility, say, on someone who had that aim then to, like, you know, spread the word, to try to keep up with modern culture. It's like if I want to be able to talk to the kids, you know, then I'm probably going to have some references in common with the kids. You see what I mean? So a lot of that how I can make it relevant will depend on what information I have. If I'm just couched in ideas and like a way of speaking at things that's like, you know, 100 years old, you know, if I'm just limited to using like the ideas of Gurdjieff in the way he talked about it,
Yeah, it doesn't really appeal, does it, to the modern?
Well, yeah, I'm going to be.
Day?
It just limits my options in the ways that I can talk about it. You know, like if I have yeah, some some familiarity with the common references, that are, that are of the moment, of the time, then yeah, I probably have different means of talking with people, or different ways of presenting the ideas to them. Like I think again in Search and Miraculous, Gurdjieff says, like, if a person can do one thing well, then it's possible to talk to them about the work, because, and you could also say if a person knows one thing well, then it's possible to talk to them about the work, because that their knowledge in that, or their talent in that area, kind of provides an in. It's like if you get good at,
like
if you
springboard.
it's like if you get good at anything, you'll be able to recognize certain laws or certain principles in that area that will map over to the work. You see what I mean? If you develop a skill in any area, or develop a good, quite a thorough knowledge in any area, then that knowledge will have application to the work. Or it's like you will have seen certain things, certain insights that have, again, real application in terms of the work. So you would be able to, it's like I could talk to you in the language of, say, if you were like a computer programmer, then if I and you didn't know about the ideas of the work, and if I had some computer knowledge, then I might be able to talk to you about those ideas, the work, through metaphors of computer programming. So, and if you had a computer knowledge, yeah, you might be able to respond to it like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So again, that would be dependent on the development of individuals in how they were able to talk to different people. Like again, that people say about Gurdjieff that he had very good general knowledge, like he was quite knowledgeable in general facts, and also he seemed to be very good at different, and had experience in various crafts. So again, if you if you have a wide variety of experiences or skill sets, then again, that's it provides you with a language. It's like if I know bricklaying, then I can maybe speak to bricklayers about the work, and again, I don't necessarily have to use the work language. You can use analogies, or so I would say, yeah, it's up to people then to try to stay with to stay up on the mainstream, so they have a context of mutual references to be able to talk to, let's say, the younger generation, if that's who we're talking about in terms of the future. And it's going to be up to people to develop whatever their skill sets were. Again, the idea is maybe that if you come to the work, that you can practice it, and maybe bring the knowledge or experiences that you acquire through the work into whatever talents and skills you have. Like maybe you're a musician. Like again, there's Robert Fripp. He spent some time with Bennett in the past, and then and he was in King Crimson and was a guitarist and musician. And then he started doing guitar craft courses where people learning guitar, and he kind of introduces some of the work ideas, you could say, through the language of guitar and creativity and things like that. So you can take those, whatever you learn in the work, and find a form of putting that out there into the public, whatever form you might have a talent for,
Yeah, brilliant. Well, we've been talking for nearly 2 hours, so I think.
Oh, Jesus, wow.
And to be honest, it's getting dark here. I'm just going to let people know that it's been the hottest day of the year here, isn't it? It's 30 degrees in our country.
Yeah, very sweaty.
It's only just beginning to cool off here, so I'm sorry if my dog started barking. I think I got to the mute button beforehand, but I think he needs to go out because it's been too hot for him. But thank you very much, Joshua. Thank you, everybody, for all the questions. And hopefully we can do another one like this again. If people think it was worthwhile and they enjoyed it, we'll do another one. We'd like to.
Yeah, I hope so.
I'm not saying we need feedback for our egos or anything, but
well, it's always nice, isn't it? It's always nice.
So thank you, Joshua. Do you want to say where? Give your Beelzebub Tapestry website address.
Well, yeah. If you go to WordPress, it's just the tapestry of Beelzebub's Tales, Gurdjieff, and the work. So you'll be able to find it through that if they want.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joshua. And until next
time. Yeah, thank you, Debbie. Good to see you.
And you. I'm going to press stop. Thanks, everybody.